Hi, I'm Casey, and today I want to talk about positive things. Let's talk about my favorite books of 2023. If you're new here, I do all the regular booktube things that people do, usually late, which is why this is going up in January, but I'm a ridiculous person who thought I was going to find a new all-time favorite in December. So, and actually I did. Found two that made it to this list, so I'm not wrong for the way I did this. Not that anyone said that. That's just my internal monologue. Anyways, I do all the booktube content you usually see, wrap-ups, not really vlogs or anything, but just like all fun stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. Today I want to talk about, let me look at my list, my 13 favorite books of 2023. I had an extremely hard time narrowing this down to 10. I sat here and I struggled with it for about 45 minutes before I went, fuck it, we're gonna do 13. I really had a great reading year as far as finding new incredible things, and specifically nonfiction, because about half of this list is nonfiction, and I am very excited to go into the next year doing the same thing, which is reading nonfiction I'm interested in. So let's go ahead and talk about my favorites. I want to give a quick honorable mention to Watership Down, the graphic novel from my beautiful spouse. If you saw my Christmas haul, which I don't know if it's going up before this or not, but this was my favorite Christmas gift I got, and it is incredible. It's got beautiful artwork in here and graphic novel. Watership Down is one of my favorite books. It was my favorite book that I read in high school, and I love to do a reread on this, and it's honestly a very comforting read for me. So when I got this on Christmas Day, I basically started crying in front of people because I had had a bad day the day before and had to like step away from people, and I put on the audiobook to calm myself down. So this was so impactful. I love it. I've already read it, and it is just, it's beautiful and it's everything, and I wanted to gush about it again here because I love it. And this didn't make my top 13 because I didn't include rereads, but this is incredible and I love it, and I think you, Nate, you're my favorite person in the whole wide world. Okay, we're gonna start by talking about my favorite nonfiction for the year. I almost said month, and I just counted. I have 5 of these on here. And I have 8 fiction, but really and truly, I couldn't have dropped anything from this list. So it just has to be, this list is what it is. So let's start talking about nonfiction. And the first one I want to talk about is How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. Really quickly, I just want to say that this is not a like 13 to 1 list. This is truly just, I couldn't pick a favorite book this year. I sat with it, like I said, for a really long time, and not only could I not drop anything from the list, I couldn't narrow my favorites down. So I'm just talking about these in general order. How the Word is Passed is Smith's reckoning with America's history, in particular how we tell our history, especially as it comes, not especially, but particularly when it comes to slavery and when it comes to the history of slavery in the United States and the way we like to just wash that away and make it a lot less vile and disgusting than it actually was. And the way that the repercussions of this have just impacted everyone, you know, forever in this country. Truly, this was an impeccable piece of nonfiction. If you can get your hands on the audiobook, or if you can engage with audiobooks, I highly recommend this version because the author narrates it himself, and you can just hear in his voice the way that he cares about this and the impact that learning all this history and going to these various places and talking to various people really connected with him and really really impacted his worldview. It's so good. And I'm not going to do this justice here because I am not good at explaining it. So I would just do a lot of looking into this book, and I would highly recommend it for everyone to pick up. It's so good. There were portions of it that I was in near tears over. And I think it's just a very important read, and I encourage everyone to pick it up. That could probably be said, by the way, about any of these nonfiction I'm about to mention, but I'm going to go ahead and say it there, and we'll just let it stand for all of these. The next one I'm going to talk about is Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. This is exactly what this book promises on the title. This is a book about asexuality and the spectrum that is. I really couldn't not include it on this list because of how much it taught me about asexuality and demisexual and pansexual and just everything. And I'm not even gonna, I think I said this in the month I talked about this, but I felt like such an idiot when it started talking about compulsive sexuality. And I went, oh shit, that's a real thing. Oh, not like a real thing, like I didn't believe it, but I had never conceived of this concept in those words or at all. And I was completely blown away, and it was really eye-opening to me to read and to listen to. And I just, again, just incredible. Highly recommend it. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is Chanel Miller's memoir detailing her rape and assault by Brock Turner. And not only that, but also the entire process from the legal perspective and her emotional state and her mental state during all of this. And this is another one, I'm just going to say, if you can engage with audiobooks, if you can get your hand on the audiobook, I can't recommend it enough because she narrates it herself, and it is just truly, truly so heartfelt and so hard to read and difficult to read, but it is so good. And I think it just talks a lot about rape culture and the impacts of assault on people, and in particular on the author. And it just, at the end, she reads her victim impact statement that she read I believe at the sentencing for Brock Turner, and it broke my heart, and I sobbed for like a solid 10 minutes. It was so good, and I think it was just so important to read. And again, I can go over all of this nonfiction that I'm about to talk about, but it was just one of the most impactful reads that I read in the entire year, and I read it very early on in the year, and I just think about it all the time, and it was just incredible. The next nonfiction that I'm going to talk about is Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. This is it's another nonfiction that tells you exactly what it is in the title. This is talking about incels, pickup artists, people who the titles are all like little catchy things like men who hate men who love women, or things of that nature. And it was really difficult to read. It was really difficult to read, and it was so frustrating to read at times because it was just, I don't know how to talk about it, except it was just harrowing at times. It was reading about these people who just fucking hate women for no reason. And it just, the way that violence is enacted upon women, and not just women who look like me who are white, but like black trans women or women across any, like, just any spectrum. And it was really enlightening and very, very difficult to read at times. And it's another one I think about all the time. And then the last nonfiction I'm going to talk about is Against White Feminism by Rafia Zakaria. This is another book, particularly just talking about white feminism and its impacts on women of color. And I love this so much because it taught me a lot, and it definitely was one of those books that I think is very important to read, to just give yourself a reality check, especially if you are a white woman like I am. And I just, reading this person's journey, all the things that they had been through, and in particular the ways in which that, white women just inherently put themselves forward, and what that means as it relates to feminism and patriarchy. It was really incredible, and it was just super, super informative, and I absolutely loved it. Okay, moving on to my best fiction for the year, and we are going to start with In the Watchful City by S. Chu Yulu. This is a fantasy novella. This is following Anima, who is they're connected to their city through the gleaming. It's very whimsical and fanciful. It's very hard to describe without talking about all the things that happen in here. But this is a short novella that really is talking a lot about storytelling and the way that it is a device through which we find connection with people who are a part of our communities or who are outside of our own communities. And I love this. I read it all in an afternoon and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. This is just beautiful and gorgeous, and I just think that as far as like a book I just picked up at a bookstore because it was on clearance, this just absolutely exceeded and surpassed any expectations I ever could have had for it. And I want a lot more people to read this so that, you know, I see more talk about it online. The next book I want to talk about is Calling for a Blanket Dance by Oscar Hokia. This is the story. It is I guess a literary fiction. This one's a little bit harder to pin down as far as genre is concerned, but this is a fiction story talking about a young man named Ever, but it is never him telling his story. It is everyone, it is the people of his family and his community telling his story all through their own stories. It is the first book that I ever read that was told like this and that used this sort of storytelling device, and it was also like I think my first 5-star of the year. It just blew me away, and I regularly think about this book and often want to revisit it, and I hope I can have time in this next year to do another listen through because this was so good, and it was emotional, and just learning about this person through the way that they had impacted other people's lives, I thought was just not just clever, but it was also just an inspired way to tell a story. It was so good, and I cared so much about all the characters, and I couldn't not include it in this list. Next book that I'm going to talk about is Dawn by Octavia E. Butler. Truly, I could have put any of the Xenogenesis series in here, but I am specifically putting Dawn in here for a couple of reasons, which I'll get to after I tell you about this book. This is a science fiction novel. This is centered around Lilith, who has been abducted from her home planet of Earth by this race of aliens, the Oankali, and she is awakened throughout various stages, and then she is told that she is to basically serve as she's hopefully going to serve as sort of a liaison between the rest of humanity that the Oankali have saved and the Oankali themselves. This entire series is truly one of the most subtle horror things I have ever read. It talks about consent, it talks about bodily autonomy, and it talks about the various ways that shit can change your mind without you ever actually doing it. And it was horrifying, and it was beautiful, and it was fascinating. And the reason I'm including Dawn over the other two novels is that I think about this one the most. The other two are also just excellent in their own right, but I truly think that as a first novel in a series, this is such a standout. It prepares you a little bit for everything that's going to come. It's devastating. I keep using that word. It's a thing I like in books. I like to be devastated, and it is heartbreaking. And just watching this person try to just react to their entire world being changed is just so horrifying and interesting, and I just loved Lilith as a character, and so this gets included. Okay, next one I'm going to talk about should come as no surprise to you if you've seen other videos on this channel, and it is Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. This is book 2 in the Indian Lake trilogy, gonna say that right this time, and it is just such a good follow-up. I've seen a lot of people talk about this as just not quite as, they just don't think it holds up quite as well to My Heart is a Chainsaw, but personally I think that this might be my favorite of the two. I would have to give them both a reread to decide, but it is such a good sequel. Again, it's a sequel, so I'm not going to talk too much about like what's happening, but we are back with Jade Daniels, and she's back in her hometown as a serial killer has gotten loose and is potentially terrorizing it, and she has to come together with her community to do something about it. This is so good, and if I would say it again, I've said it before, if you thought My Heart was a Chainsaw is okay, but you wanted it to be more violent off the bat, this is it. This is it. This starts swinging axes and doesn't stop until the last page. It's so good, and I think it's just such a good commentary on how difficult it is to go back to a place where you felt like you were a different person and to not just kind of fall back into that person. It's so good, and I loved it so much, and I can't wait for book 3. The next book I'm going to talk about is The 7 Moons of Mali Almeida by Shihan Karatinalaka. This is a historical fiction / fantasy following Mali Almeida, who is a photojournalist who is murdered in Colombo in 1990. And he is in the afterlife, and he has 7 moons to sort of make his peace and move on. And this was so incredible for me, and it was so beautiful, and I loved it so much, and I really think it was just so impactful. I cried while listening to this, and I think that it's like, it hits really right for historical fiction. It's very informative, and without like being dry or anything, which is usually a thing I feel about historical fiction, but it also is just such a good character study, and I think about Molly and Jackie and Dee Dee all the time, and I love the ending to this. This is probably my favorite ending out of the entire year. And oh my God, it's so good. It's gonna make me tear up if I think about it too long. So I'm gonna talk about my next book now. The next book is Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. This is a historical horror. This is following Juan and Gaspar, I believe, in the 1980s, as they are beginning to set out on a road trip shortly after Gaspar's mother and Juan's wife has passed away. And this is a weird one. It's a big old gal here, and truly this is just so incredible. This is a book a lot about generational trauma and about the ways in which, you know, desperately trying to protect your children can in fact just end up hurting them. And it's a little culty, it's a little violent, but when it goes there, it goes there hard. And it was so good. It was just so incredible. And I loved this so much. I listened to the audiobook for this from my library, and then I went and I bought myself a copy at Christmas because I really want a copy of this, because I really want to reread it. And I loved this so much, and I voted for this for the Goodreads Best of Horror twice, and I still kind of think it should have won, but I understand what one did, but I loved it. It was incredible. So it has to be on this list as well. The next book on this list, we've only got 2 more to go, is Chlorine by Jade Song. This is a horror fiction following a young woman who is a competitive swimmer. Her name is Ren, and she is dealing with an abusive coach, a coach who is creeping on her, and a lot of her own expectations, and the expectations put on her not only by her teammates, but by her family and by everyone and herself. And it gets weird, and there's a lot of body horror, and it just, I read this just in the first couple weeks of December, and I immediately knew it was going to be on this list. And it in fact decidedly pushed off some things off of this list because I found this to be just so incredibly impactful and just really and truly hard to read at times. It's, putting myself back into high school times, even though I wasn't a competitive swimmer, is just sometimes really difficult. And reading about the struggles of a young woman who's dealing with insecurities and a lot of inner turmoil, it was just so good. It was so good. And this should have been on the Best of Horror list on Goodreads, and I don't know why it wasn't. Actually, I do. It's because Goodreads is a numbers game, but whatever. Still should have been there. And our last book in this 13-book sprint is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I had to put it here. I had to talk about it. This is a fantasy book following a world that deals a lot with ecological destruction, and in particular, the 5th season is usually a time of great tectonic upheaval and a lot of just death and dismay for people. And in here we are following a few perspectives as they are living in this world that's also got some people who can control like earthen movements, and it's kind of hard to talk about for me because I'm not very good at explaining it, but it's a lot of people who control things, but it's also a magic system that is realistic in the amount of like energy expended and consumed, and it's just fascinating. It's good. I'm not going to be the first person to tell you to read this. It won a damn Hugo Award. Just read it. It's good. It's really fucking good. And it also has just such a good ending. It was one of those endings where I read the last sentence and I immediately like was like standing up being like, I knew it, I fucking knew it. And I was so excited, and I'm so excited to continue in the series, and I'm so happy I got around to this year. Okay, that's it. Those are my 13 favorite books of 2023. I had a really good reading year. Thank you for hanging out with me while I talked positively about my favorite books. Please do algorithm things if you feel like, comment, subscribe. I will see you next Friday, and I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I hope your year in reading was just as good as mine was. Bye.